Hello, and welcome to our EA training on love and logic. We're going to go ahead and start with our purpose and priorities for today. As you know, the Ames Community School District commits to equity and access that empowers every individual to reach their full personal and educational potential. Our priorities for today are clear and consistent communication to support positive and proactive community relationships, as well as a safe and responsive system that promotes the mental health and well-being of every individual. So for our learning outcomes, we want to focus on creating self-sufficient learners while providing a loving and understanding support system that is built upon thoughtfulness. So we want to make sure that we're supporting students' self-esteem and their resilience. So an introduction, Love and Logic is a research-based school of thought that, and there are many books written about it, and it's a strategy that's basically used to reduce the reactivity of adults. And that's difficult because a lot of times when we think about strategies, we're focusing on the student. But in this case, we really want to focus on what are some things that we are doing to help them to set limits without anger, lecture, or threats. We want to respond to our students as the human beings that they are, and we want to make sure that we're creating an atmosphere of safety and that they're not shutting down or having fear when they're at school. So some background information for you. When we think about the brain, we know that we have different modes that we may be in. We may feel that fight, flight, or freeze. And that's kind of when we're in that survival mode, when our lower brain functions are taking over because our learning brain is just not able to process the information coming at us. Or maybe there's something else in our life that is causing stress, whether that is waking up late, not having breakfast, some other stress that may be going on at home related to our family. But we want to recognize this so that when we start feeling frustrating, we know we're entering that emotional reactive brain zone and we're giving over to our own control and we are increasing the student's reactivity. So if we're increasing the reactivity in ourselves, that's going to mirror in the way the student responds. So our response is extremely important. In Love and Logic, they consider there to be 9 essential skills, and we are just doing a very brief overview of some of these skills today. And I have to say that I like many aspects of Love and Logic, but there are some give and take situations where not everything is going to be appropriate for all school scenarios, so we'll try to talk that through. The first concept or skill that we're going to talk about is neutralizing arguing. The less our lips move, the more effective we become. And I basically take that to mean we need to think through our words carefully because more words doesn't mean better. And we don't necessarily need to have lots of words to make a problem go away. In fact, it often can make it worse. So to neutralize arguing, we must stay calm. You cannot reason with a child who is in their low brain functioning and just not able to process new information coming at them. Remember, they're in their fight, flight, or freeze state, and we need to think about how we're responding to that student that has lagging skills at that moment and needs our help. So you're going to choose a one-liner and say it with empathy. So maybe they come down, oh, and they're stomping down the hallway. And you might just say simply, I know, because you're relating to the struggle that they may be going through, even if you don't know all the details yet. Or they might say, this is just not fair. And you could say, I'm sure it seems that way. And a really important one-liner from Love and Logic is, I care about you too much to argue. Now, you do have to use this one carefully because it can sound ingenuine if you say it too often or if you say it with an inappropriate tone. So if you say, I care about you too much to argue, it sounds sarcastic and it does not allow the student to believe that you truly care about them. It makes them think, ew, what was that sing-songy voice? I want to talk to someone who I know really cares about me. So another thing you can do in neutralizing arguing is not overthink it. Remember, you're going to choose that one-liner, but you're also going to work on being unflappable. When kids start to get overly frustrated and they start to escalate, it's important to keep our bodies calm and make sure that we are showing that in a crisis, they are not going to be able to get us to react or bring our emotions to that bubbling over point, that we can keep ourselves calm to mirror how we expect them to respond. So you will continue what you're doing, maybe calmly repeat that one-liner, but remember, sometimes less words is better. So you may just continue what you're doing silently, which might be organizing around the classroom or following your schedule, allowing them to start to extinguish themselves. They may stomp around the classroom, they may say some nasty words, but they need to just kind of calm themselves down, because getting in an argument at this point, no one's going to win. We want to delay the consequences. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Consequences do not need to happen immediately. And remember, consequences are not all negative. There can be positive and negative behavior responses. But we want to take time to develop a plan. And when you are responding to a student's behavior, you really want to make sure that you are following what the special education teacher and or classroom teacher has discussed in that student's plan. You do not want to deviate from that plan and come up with your own special plan based upon what you think will work best for that student. As the EA, you're there to support the student and the teachers, and you have to work as a team. If you deviate from that plan, the student sees it as a loophole, and they'll come to you to solve the problem in a different, more preferred way because you did it one time before. So you do want to include the problem or the student in the problem solving steps, but you want to make sure that you're including all parties, that they understand what you're doing, not that you all have to sit around a table together, but you're going to name the problem, think of solutions together, explore some potential consequences. And this is where it's great if the student can come up with their own ideas. What would happen if you did kick a student at recess? What would be a natural consequence for that? I might have to sit out for a little while. And they'll come up with consequences you may have never even thought of. And then together you can pick the best solution. Empathy. Huge, huge, huge. I talk about this in many different videos, but empathy is a great place to start with students, and all of our skills are strengthened by having empathy. We can identify with others' needs, we can connect to them emotionally, and provide that safe feeling that our students are definitely needing. So, we do not want to go on in a big long monologue. That doesn't seem empathetic, that seems self-focused. You want to keep your message short. Again, choose a statement that's genuine. You're not going to say, "Oh, I wish you would come and walk over here with me right now. I would love to help somebody who's walking over here right now," in a sing-songy voice. Your vocal tone and inflections matter so much. You might say something like, "That's so sad, and this must be tough." But the way you say it, again, matters. And your gestures matter, and your eye contact matters. So if you're way too close to the student and you're saying, "Oh, this is just such a bummer, isn't it?" Well, they're not babies, so we don't need to be directly up in their face using a baby voice. But we also don't want to be standing back at a distance meekly saying, "I know this must be tough." If you feel timid about it and you don't know how to approach a student, you need to watch what the teachers working with that student are doing. You want to make sure that your nonverbal communication is coming across the way you want it to, and this will take practice. Another thing that you want to do is in delaying those consequences is send a power message. And by power, we don't mean "this is my power, I'm in charge of everything," but we mean, what are you going to do to empower the students to be engaged in the problem, to help them think through the size of their problem? You might use something like this rating scale off to the right to help them identify, is this a glitch? Not a big deal at all? Is it a big problem, or is it an emergency? When they come in mad, they're likely to say every single thing is an emergency. But by the time you've let them kind of stomp around and diffuse and used those one-liners like, "Oh, that's a bummer," then you're going to see them start to be more rational, about rating themselves using this scale. The other thing you can do is offer choices. So you might say things like, "Do you like to hear what other kids have tried?" But you don't want to offer a million choices like, "Well, we could sit on the carpet, or we could sit at your stool, or you could sit next to your friend, or you could even stand at the door, or it might be okay to lay in the calm corner." That's too much for their brain to process. You need to give 2 or 3 choices. 3 is often too much. And each time a choice is offered, then you need to think about going on to step 4 and having the students think through, how will that work? So if they decide not to sit at the carpet with their group, how will it work when they're sitting at their table? Because you want them to understand what will happen if they change their actions and still be happy with the choice that they made. The recovery process. After all of this frustration has happened, what are we going to do? Recovery is not a time out. It's not a time where the student's just taking a break and we're not engaging at all. We may need to give them some quiet time by themselves, yes, but it's not going to get into time where they're bored or where they're doing a preferred activity. But we also don't want to be sending work yet. They're not ready. We want to have the attitude of, you're wanted in this classroom, whether it's the special education classroom or the gen ed classroom, and we need to give them time to process what's happened and get to a point where they feel that they belong wherever they're going to go. So there may have to be some restorative practices that happen before they're ready to enter another classroom. We need to continuously work to develop positive relationships. And I'm sure you've heard this many, many, many times before. You want to focus on students' non-academic strengths. Academic is awesome, but there are so many other wonderful things about what students are doing in school. We want to smile and make sure we're smiling genuinely, not just plastering on a fake smile as we walk down the hallway. I know sometimes it's difficult, but it needs to come from a true place. And if you're not ready to give a ear-to-ear smile, don't do it. Make sure that you are listening to students, not just talking over them. And if you see they're doing something well, you can use the I noticed technique. So you might say, hey, I noticed that you treated Jenna nicely during lunch today when you offered her a seat at the table. That was so awesome. Those are some great ways to develop positive relationships. But another important thing to understand is you may not always be the right person for the job. And so it's important to know other adults who you can tag team with. So say, for instance, you're walking a student through the lunch line and they are just getting more and more angry and you're not quite sure what's going on, but you notice the closer you get to them, the more they start huffing and puffing and stomping. That's when you probably need to tag team with an adult because you may be a trigger in this situation. So find another EA or a classroom teacher and just say, hey, can I stand with your group and you go stand next to this student? Sometimes that adult switch can really help, but you have to know which students you're doing it with. And you have to make sure that you're not throwing another adult at them that could be a potential trigger. Set limits with enforceable statements. So if you're going to set a limit, you need to understand that this is not about your control, and we need to make sure that we are sharing the control. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in another slide. But here's an example. An adult says, stop that. And the child says, you can't make me. Well, the result in this situation is the child then has control because it's very true. You cannot physically change another student's behavior. You can set routines and you can work on things together, but the child in their own mind is going to have to change their own behavior. You can certainly influence it, but you can't make it happen. So we're not trying to tell kids what to do. Instead, we're going to describe to them what we will allow them to do and work on it with them. So here's some examples of some enforceable statements. So you might say, hey, you can feel free to join us at the table after you've washed your hands. And again, this is where that genuine voice comes into play, because if you're saying it in that sing-songy, feel free to join us at the table after you've washed your hands, they are not going to respond to that well. You have to think about your demeanor. Volume is another super important thing. If you're trying to get a student to listen, you don't want to talk in a super loud volume. You might want to say, I'm ready to listen when the volume of your voice is like this. And then you'll see some other statements about giving and what it will look like I am happy to help you when I see that you're raising your hand. That's an example of an I give statement or an I provide statement. Or you might also say something like, you may join the group when your body shows me that your hands are in your lap and your bottom is on the ground. You have to be specific when you're giving enforceable statements, because if you just say, you may join the group when your body is calm, well, calm might mean something different to everyone. They might say that flailing their arms and jumping up and down is calm, because you know what? That might help them calm down. But it needs to be something that's appropriate for the environment that you're in with that student. Use choices to prevent power struggles. My goodness, do we see power struggles within schools? Kids do not want your power, they want their own. When a student feels that they have power with the adults as well as power within themselves, they'll have less need to seek power over others. And by power, we just mean control of the situation. So it's really important to offer choices, not orders, as we've discussed, to make sure that you're starting with students' strengths and giving them appropriate responsibility, that you are expressing interest rather than praise. So instead of, good job, you'll say, oh man, I noticed that you used such careful handwriting on your math project today. Thank you so much for taking the time. I bet you feel proud of yourself. It's really important, again, to be genuine. Kids will see right through you. And if you think that getting into this power struggle is going to help by giving demands, then you're really going to lose the student. Every child needs appropriate boundaries, but you need to reflect on, is this an appropriate demand in the situation, or am I just seeking to have control over them? For instance, if you're saying to a student, sit on the carpet, sit on the carpet, sit on the carpet, but there are 2 other kids in the room not sitting on the carpet, that's not appropriate, because maybe the teacher in that environment is going to allow some movement. You need to make sure that you are having appropriate expectations for your students instead of getting into an inappropriate power struggle. Again, we're giving them choices, and the choices come by building that emotional bank. We want to constantly give deposits, and we want to make sure that we're not taking out too many withdrawals. And you may have heard of the concept of a 5-to-1 ratio, where you need to give 5 compliments to 1 constructive criticism or something negative. So if you're saying something like, you never listen, that's a withdrawal from their emotional bank account. So then you're going to need to give 5 positives. And I'm not saying that you're sitting there counting it in your head saying, you're wearing such a lovely outfit today and you're doing such a good job. That's not genuine. But I'm saying as you interact with that student, you now need to focus on more positive interactions, or it might be time for an adult switch. You never want to give a child a choice unless you know you can follow through on that. And that's why you really need to work in collaboration with the special education teacher and the general classroom teacher. You also don't want to give choices when it's a dangerous situation. And this is, again, when you'll probably need that special education teacher. If a situation starts to look dangerous, you need to get them involved and watch how they respond, because what you might see as dangerous may not actually be the biggest of the big problems. So we have to choose which fire to fight, if you like that analogy. And then you also want to make sure that you're okay with the student offering a different suggestion, and then maybe it's an acceptable option. Remember, we're including them in our problem solving. How to guide students to own and solve their problems. There's a couple of different things we can do, and I actually have a lot of information on this page, but we're just going to give a brief overview, not digest it all fully. But we can certainly dive into this more at other times, or you can look at this on your own time. You might provide a solution wheel. So this little visual right here off to the left could be great to have posted in your classroom so they know these are the options when I'm feeling frustrated. I might need to talk it out with a friend. I might need to tell them to stop, or I may even need to walk away. This is obviously more appropriate for elementary school. Something that's really important, especially when we get into the middle and high school realm, is this idea of restorative practices. And this little example off to the right over here is called A Tale of Two Schools. It says, Carlos had a heated argument with his parents before leaving school, so he's running late. Let's see the difference that restorative practices or policies and practices can make. So off to the right are the restorative practices, and to the left is the zero tolerance education system, which is what most of us grew up in. So he comes to school, he's greeted by metal detectors and a police search. Now, we may not have all had that, but that's starting off with that, punitive and concern, versus teachers who are welcoming and are excited to see him and fellow students as they walk in. The teacher scolds the student immediately, and Carlos talks back and is given detention. Or on the restorative side, his teacher waits until after class to speak to Carlos to learn more and set up a meeting with the school counselor. So if you look at these two sides, you can see that in the restorative practice side, it's a lot more pause before reacting. It's trying to understand and believing the best in the student so that you can work with them to restore what the problem might be versus just be reactionary. And so I've got a little link to some more restorative practices resources down here. And then I also have a link to Plan B Conversations, which follows the work of Dr. Ross Greene. And that's, again, a way to involve students in the problem solving. And like I said, this is a lot to digest, but all of your special education teachers should know more about this. And these are practices that you'll start to notice and see and hopefully be able to implement yourselves. The love and logic mindset is boiled down to this: I will treat you with thoughtfulness, so you will know how to treat me. Feel free to do anything that does not cause a problem for anyone else. And if you do cause a problem, I'll ask you to solve it. It's not a, if you cause a problem, you will solve it. It's a, we're a team, we're going to work on this together. And what I like about the love and logic mindset is that it's not just teacher to student. It's about our whole school community. Because don't we want our coworkers to be thoughtful in how they treat us? And don't we want to feel free to do anything as long as it doesn't cause other people problems? And if we do cause a problem, don't we expect that as adults we'll work together to solve it? So that's what's really cool about this, is it's something we can work on together. There is a Google reflection form at the end of this PD, and it should be attached to the classroom. There's just a few questions that we'd love for you to answer and then turn in. We just want to know, what are some takeaways from today's learning? What are some things you wonder about, or questions you have about how to respond using this love and logic mindset? And then how can you help fill someone's emotional bank today? And that's just a little homework nugget for you, because it's important to take these practices and not just use them in the work environment, but to live them in our lives, because we want to treat everybody as valuable human beings. So if you have any questions, you can contact me at the email address below, justme.mckinney@ames.k12.ia.us. Thank you so much for participating in this professional development today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.